and Meni Styliadou, the leader of the industry consortium, and I will give you a very short introduction to the project. And we will then have Martin de Witt speaking to us. And Martin is actually a friend, a long-term friend, but Martin is also a patient advocate and a very knowledgeable and educated expert in the area of patient-reported outcomes, chronic diseases, and patient perspectives, and how to really measure and incorporate that in healthcare and research. So first of all, we will give you a very brief introduction to this H2O project. And afterwards, Martin will speak on patient-reported outcomes and personalized medicine. So Meni, would you like to say a few words? Maybe you are the kind of the mother of the whole project, as you have been working on this for a long time, and you are also the leader of the industry consortium of our public-private partnership, which is actually the basis of this project.
Thank you, Tanya. So when we started this project, we said from the beginning that our vision is to empower patients with digital tools to measure their outcomes in a standardized way in order to improve care, but also create valuable data for researchers and other stakeholders. Maybe you can go to the next slide because it shows this on the slide. So what we felt from the outset of this project is that patients, when they were having conversations with their clinicians or their healthcare providers, it was always difficult for them to explain what was really happening in their lives. So if we could give them digital tools that would allow them to capture their outcomes in a standardized way and in a way that's also understood by the clinicians, this would help the community better care and better outcomes for the patient. But what we felt from care policy, but also for science, the idea of the observatory came up, and we were very fortunate on this journey that when the call for tender was announced, that the great consortium that we are currently working with decided to apply, and we then became, I believe, an incredible team to actually bring this vision to life. So our vision is that we will create independent observatories in Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and Austria, which will be linked to the healthcare ecosystem in these 4 countries. These independent entities will create tools that will be open to all patients with diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, and or cancer. So not only the patients of the academic hospitals that we are partnering with, but other patients will also be able to use the same tools. The data will become a vital source, which will be available to all, like water, like the name we've chosen. And this has been an important moment for us when we came up with a name, because we thought that health data is vital for life, but needs to be safeguarded and needs to be managed very, very carefully in the interest of the society as a whole. We believe that we will be a catalyst for creating a major ecosystem where we will be able to actually unify the fragmented health data in Europe. And this will allow us to stratify patients based on patient-reported outcomes on a large scale. I understand no such similar project has ever taken place in Europe. And hopefully this will build trust and will allow us to expand H2O to a larger number of patients and providers, possibly in other European countries, or why not, potentially even outside of Europe. So next slide, please. The next slide just gives you a picture of what we are trying to do, which is about creating these 4 national observatories that, however, will be governed by a European observatory that will ensure this consistency in the entire approach and will also ensure safeguarding the appropriate ethical and governance principles in all the observatories. And I think in a nutshell, that is what we are going to do, and hopefully you will hear more from us very soon.
Yes, thank you, Manny, for introducing the vision. We would just very briefly take you through the work plan, which is actually built on a very solid governance model, which we will develop in the project. And as we have already discussed in our kickoff meeting, which has actually started today, the basis of everything will be this governance, data security and ethical structure, which will also guarantee some interoperability and standardization between the national observatories and the pan-European one. So we will have 4 national observatories in 4 countries and a pan-European one to ensure standardization and interoperability. And this will work very closely with Work Package 2, where we will develop the technology, and also with the disease work packages, which are Work Package 3 on diabetes, 4 on IBD, on inflammatory bowel disease, and 5 on cancer, where we will develop outcome sets, or where we will build on existing standards and further advance and develop outcome sets for the 3 disease areas, with also a main focus on generic outcome sets, which are actually measuring, or meaning that we will measure probably the same issues in all 3 diseases and add to that disease-specific outcomes and outcome measures, which are important. We will then have another work package which actually focuses more on the operational issues of H2O, so really running these observatories in the different countries, and another work package 7, which focuses on the scientific coordination and project management. Important to us is that the sustainability of H2O is very much in the focus, and we want to make H2O, and we want to make these observatories operational within the first half of the project. So that's really an important issue in our project. So to really ensure that H2O will sustain after the project duration. And what is also very key to our project is that patients and patient representatives are involved from the beginning of the project and in every task. We initially planned a separate patient work package, but then decided to really integrate patients and patient perspectives and their views in all of the different tasks and work packages. And it's important that we have patient representatives on board, but we also have representative patients who are then participating and giving us input in this co-creation process, where we really want to take all the stakeholders on board and with us. So this is really one of the key issues on H2O. And saying that, another important thing is that we would like to reach out. So we have already a lot of international collaborators which have given us letters of support and helped us during the development of the project applications. And you can see here some of them. But we are keen to reach out. One of the important things is that H2O will actually be linked closely to the national healthcare system. And as we have discussed before, not only linked to this healthcare system, but will probably also change and advance the way health data are treated and managed within the healthcare systems. But important is that we really want to involve as many patients and providers as possible. So this should be really an open project where every stakeholders which is specific and legitimate interest can really become collaborators, and that's very much encouraged. We also think that H2O will act as a technology incubator, so we assume that there will be new providers developing technologies for capturing patient-reported outcomes, and we also envision that they will be linked to our project. So that's really one of the important issues we would like to focus on. And as patients are in the key center of our projects, we have decided to ask Martin de Witt, who is a really well-known international expert on patient-reported outcomes, who is a patient advocate himself and who has already worked a lot with patient-reported outcomes in chronic diseases and has been one of the key people, one of the initial people to found and set up structures in rheumatology when integrating patient-reported outcomes into the outcome measurement schemes. And Martin is also, as I said before, a close friend. For some years we have met in international activities, and I'm very happy, Martin, that you will give us a talk here. Unfortunately, as we said before, our kickoff meeting was actually planned in Vienna, and you have already come to Vienna once for a talk, and we would have liked to invite you again. But maybe in the later stages of the project, we will all come to Vienna and celebrate a bit the start and kick-off of our project. But right now, we can only listen in a virtual way to you, and we are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for your very nice introduction. And I'm absolutely honored, and I think it's also a great pleasure to be here and to attend this meeting. And I absolutely intend to stay involved in this project. And I hope that I will be at the final meeting in Vienna to hear more about the results, because I think it's really a very exciting project. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks again to the organizers for having me and telling a little bit more about the role of PROs in personalized healthcare. And I think specifically in this community that we are now here, PROs are seen as very important. But the question is, are they really the holy grail in personalized healthcare? I will talk a little bit from my background as a patient representative. As Tanya introduced, I'm a person with psoriatic arthritis for more than 40 years, and as an active patient representative in different patient organizations. And you can see here a few of my other disclosures. So what would I like to cover in the coming 30 minutes? I think it's just briefly try to summarize why are PROs important? And if they are so important, what are the gaps? And if you want to overcome these gaps, what needs to be changed? And having focused on that, then I would like to focus further on how to transform the healthcare system and to make sure that PROs are taken care of in the most appropriate ways. So let's start with looking in a little bit more details to PROs. And a very simple definition of a PRO. Patient-reported outcomes are measurements coming directly from patients about how they feel or function in relation to a health condition, and it's therapy without interpretation by healthcare professionals. I think what is key in this definition is that it is really the opinion of patients without interference of the opinion or actions of a healthcare professional. So they are really 100% coming from the patients and reflecting their preferences and opinions. PROs are not the only outcomes, so I think it's very sensible to also look at it in a broader context. Patient-reported outcomes, and as you might expect, I will use a lot of examples from the field of rheumatology. And in this example now here, I would like to focus on a few domains that are important for people with rheumatoid arthritis, abbreviated as RA. An often emerging symptom is pain. It's the most important symptom in rheumatic diseases. And actually, this is the only one that can be reported in a PRO by patients. Normally, we use a visual analog scale, but it could also be an NRS, a numeric rating scale. In addition, there are clinician-reported outcomes. You could think about something like swelling, which is assessed by a physician by taking and assessing 28 swollen joint counts. And then there are objective measures, objective outcomes like inflammation, which is a biomarker which could be measured by a blood value and, for instance, by a CRP. What is important in this overview is the fact that I find it very important to make a distinction between the domain or outcome of interest, which you can see in the first row, and the instrument or the outcome measure that we use to measure the magnitude of that domain. So there is a difference between a domain and an instrument that we use to measure that domain. And then finally, there is something like what we call composite indexes, which is a combination of outcomes that can reflect PROs, clinician-reported outcomes, as well as objective outcomes. And in rheumatoid arthritis, a very often used instrument is the DAS28, which is the disease activity score, including 28 joints. So they are all important. But the question that I raised in the title was, of course, are PROs, are the patient-reported outcomes really the holy grail to get a good assessment of disease activity in patients? So why do we think they are important? I think, first of all, and I attended the previous meeting, and when we discussed the stakeholders, many participants mentioned the role of the regulators. And I think that's not for nothing, because also regulators like the FDA and the EMA, they appreciate inclusion of PROs in treatment assessments. And they argue that a formal PRO instrument can be more reliable than clinician assessments. But there are other reasons why PROs are important. And I would like to focus on an example from rheumatology, and go back in history in 1992, where for the first time, rheumatologists came together to try to develop a core set for rheumatoid arthritis. And what they wanted was to harmonize outcomes in clinical trials for rheumatoid arthritis. And after many discussions, they agreed on a set of 8 outcomes that you see presented here. If you look well, you probably see that it's a very physician-driven outcome set. And that's not surprising, because at that time, there were no patients involved in the selection of outcomes. We now find it strange, but at that time, and we are talking about almost 30 years ago, that was how things were done. So from 2002, the organization that developed core outcome sets, OMERACT, Outcome Measures in Rheumatology, started to involve patients in the development of core outcome sets. And since then, we have seen that new outcomes, more relevant to patients, have come to the front. So many of you will be aware of the importance of fatigue. And that's not different in rheumatoid arthritis, where patients persistently brought forward the importance and severity of a symptom like fatigue, and the fact that it is often neglected in clinical encounters. Other items that patients mentioned were work participation, independence, quality of life. And notice that quality of life was not part of the original core set. And it's something that patients called asking them, when would you be satisfied with a new treatment? Well, something like going back to normality. So these are a completely other type of outcomes. And these are patient-driven. And since then, the core set for rheumatoid arthritis is updated, and fatigue is now also included as a recommended outcomes for clinical trials. The fact that we develop these type of core outcome sets and that we also emphasize the role of patients is because we are now almost all convinced that perspective of physicians differ from that of patients. There are many examples where preferences and priorities of patients are not the same. It doesn't mean that they are, of course, completely different, but there are significant differences. And here you see an example where the discordant preferences of patients and healthcare providers are illustrated about which aspects of treatments matter most. And you can see that in the blue bars are in fact the outcomes that patients rank higher than physicians, and they are all process oriented. So items like safety, delivery and timing, patient-physician relationships, and access to treatment. These are items that are important to patients, while physicians focus more on structure and on outcomes like mortality, morbidity, and health-related quality of life. Another reason is that it's important to check with patients whether the instruments that we use are really valid for the population of interest. And again, this is an example from the field of rheumatology. RA patients do have high scores on some depression questionnaires. And what is the reason for that? Well, it's clearly not because they are depressed, but it is when patients looked at these questionnaires, they noticed that there are questions that have a different meaning to them. I always have a slow start in the morning. If you know that stiffness and pain are important items, you know that that clarifies that patients have a slow start in the morning. I often feel tired. That's the result of the fatigue that I mentioned earlier, but not because of depressive moods. And also the same for I can't do the same as before, which for patients with rheumatoid arthritis is associated with physical limitations. And again, not with depression. So this questionnaire is obviously not valid to be used in RA patients. And this is something that we really found out when we asked patients to review which questionnaire for depression do you think matches most your opinion and feeling of depression. So patients were involved in the domain match of the instruments. And then finally, there's another reason why we have to look at patient-reported outcomes. Because there is something that physicians often call residual symptoms. So these are the symptoms that do not belong or doesn't fit their definitions of a target of a treatment or their definition of remission or a specific state of disease. So for rheumatoid arthritis, there is this often used definition of remission. And it has 4 components. Tender joint counts, which needs to be less than 1. Swollen joint counts. A CRP, which is the blood level, less than 1 milligram. And then the patient global assessment. So 1 PRO. And this is a composite definition of remission. But there is something strange. If you look at the data from clinical trials and also from registries, we find that there is a weak correlation between disease activity and disease impact. And that is clearly reflected in the item of patient global assessment. So where we ask patients, taking your disease overall, how are you doing today? The patient global assessment is often higher than 1, despite the fact that people are in remission in accordance to the first 3 components. So that means that the patient global assessment more or less blurs the assessment. And that wouldn't be a problem if it was not the case that this definition is included in many recommendations for treatment, which say that if you are not in remission, you have to increase the treatment, the drug that are prescribed. So that means that a higher patient global assessment should lead to higher prescription of medication, while we all know that probably non-pharmacological interventions would be more appropriate to manage these so-called residual symptoms that are causing the patient global assessment. Because the patient global assessment is often driven by other items than disease activity. It's really the disease impact, which might be physical limitations. It might be comorbidities. It might be the loss of work or a job or not being able to carry out the responsibilities that you have. So this is something that asks for another approach of health and outcomes. So what if PROs are important, but there are so many deficits? What needs to be changed? Well, actually, we should ask ourselves 2 questions. And I'm also asking these questions to you. Are the outcome measures that you use developed with active input from patients? And are the currently used outcomes selected or prioritized by patients? Often this is not the case. I think there are many registries and hospitals that are using PROs that have been determined still by physicians. So let's look at personalized healthcare. And what are the most important features of personalized healthcare? And you see them here. It's a holistic approach. It's the use of PROs, but also shared decision-making, promoting self-management, providing multidisciplinary team care and patient education, and a user-friendly organization of healthcare. We are specifically interested in the use of PROs. And we have to ask the question, the outcomes that we develop and selected, to whom are they important? And are they really important from the perspective of patients? And how do we know? This is the ICOM core set for inflammatory arthritis. And I think they are a perfect example of a core set that sincerely has taken into account the perspective of patients. You can see here the domains that are relevant for patients. They are mentioned at first. They are all patient reported, and they include important aspects like pain, fatigue, activity limitations, overall emotional and physical health impact, and also work, school, and work productivity. And in addition, there are a number of treatment-specific outcomes like adverse events, response, and disease activity. And this set has been developed with active input of patients in the steering committee, focus groups, but also by carrying out a systematic literature review in patient-relevant outcomes. And you are probably all aware that ICOM is really developing core sets in the context of value-based healthcare. The second question that we have to raise is, if we have selected outcomes, are they really developed with patients? And also in the beginning of this afternoon, it became clear that also in the H2O project, patients will play a crucial role in developing core outcome sets and also in the conduct of the work packages. Tanya very briefly referred to the discussion how that work package and how patients should be included. Should they have had their own work package or included in all the existing work packages? And I'm very glad to hear that you have chosen for the latter. It is inclusion. It's the fourth diagram that you see here. It clearly states that if you are really promoting co-production and co-creation of core outcome sets, patients should be involved in all the work packages right from the start and on an equal level. It is something different than integration or participation. It's really about involvement. And maybe in this respect, it's also good to refer to some different terms that I use. Participation has to do with doing a study or asking people to provide data for a registry. They are study participants. Engagement of patients refers to something that we could call consultation. It's no patient involvement. Patient involvement emerges when we are really starting to collaborate with patients. And collaborating with patients means that we also apply the principles of shared decision making in the work packages, in a project team, or in the board of a registry or a biobank. And actually, that's not happening that often. And although we still say that patients should have a say and they are the owners of the data, they are often still consulted, but not really involved. So there is still a challenge to make this a reality. And I'm absolutely sure that this project will be quite key in demonstrating the benefits of having patients as collaborators at all levels. When we are talking about developing PROs with the input of patients, I just want to refer to the development of a psoriatic arthritis impact of disease score that I've been involved in. we have published all the different formats of patients' involvement in this one PRO. And it meant that we had patients in the steering group. We had 11 national patient research partners that attended all our task force meetings, helping translating the questionnaires and helping developing and deciding on the final format of the instrument. Patients were involved as respondents in cognitive debriefing interviews. And finally, they were also consulted when we originally prioritized domains, and later on also in the validation study by filling in questionnaires. So different formats of patients' involvement in different numbers, and we think that this really ensures the representativeness of the instrument and of the patient perspective. Does this all make a difference? I think it is, because at our final meeting, when all the data was presented, the physicians proposed that we actually could do with the first 9 items. Everything that the other items wouldn't add much to the final outcome, the score of this instrument. And they had the opinion, the shorter, the better. But because we had decided that this new instrument should also serve the purpose of clinical practice, the patients argued that also the items number 10 to 12, embarrassment, social participation, and depression, were important items. And they often already were neglected in the consultation room. So by taking them out of this new questionnaire, this impact of disease score, we wouldn't serve the patients. And therefore, the physicians and the patients achieved consensus that they should be included as well. So now the P8 is a 12-item instrument, and it's more and more used in clinical practice. So finally, how to transform healthcare systems and make it more patient-centered. And here I would like to introduce the impact triad. The impact trials actually says that patients experience the impact of their condition in 3 manners. It's about the importance of the symptoms, it's about their severity, and it is about their ability to self-manage and to control the severity of that symptom. And by saying this, you will probably notice that this is much in line with the newly proposed WHO definition of health as the ability to adapt and to self-manage. I think it's important to focus on impact and to see how PROs and personalized healthcare address these 3 elements of health and impact. So going back to the different outcomes, the importance can only be determined by patients. So for this, we absolutely need patient-reported outcomes. But for the severity and for self-management, we also need the input from clinician-reported outcomes and objective measures. There are outcomes that the patients cannot report themselves, and we need the help of others. So there still needs to be a balance between these 3 different types of outcomes. And if we deal and we take them and we measure them well, they should at the end of the day help patients to self-manage their condition and to monitor and control the severity of their symptoms. So that's the role of the PROs in clinical practice. Personalized healthcare means that we have to use the PROs in the context of real-world evidence. And I think here, this new project of H2O comes into play. How are we going to use the real-world evidence, in this case, coming from 4 different countries, and how can we make them accessible and feedback to patients in order to help them to better take decisions and to better self-management their conditions. And I think that is the real challenge, and to find the techniques and the way of collecting and presenting and feedback the information to patients that they can make decisions that really are focusing on their personal needs. I would like to end with something that we recently published, and what we would call the dual target strategy. And we make the metaphor of playing bowling. What is a perfect strike? Well, if we follow the physician-determined definition of remission, it's actually hitting the first 3 pins, the pins of inflammation, joint count, for instance, and swelling. But then there are what the physicians, as I explained, call the residual symptoms. And these are all the other pins. And they are often not included in the definition of remission. So we need actually 2 definitions or 2 targets for the management of a condition. It's the biological target of remission, which can be measured with physician measured outcomes and objective outcomes. But then we have also remission from the patient perspective, which includes probably a majority of patient-reported outcomes. And that is a dual target strategy. So here I will end this presentation. And although I think that we haven't found the Holy Grail, PROs are indispensable in personalized healthcare. Patient participation and patient involvement in their development and selection is key to ensure that we measure what is important for patients. And don't forget, practical recommendations exist and may guide building successful partnerships. Thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martin, for the great presentation. Thank you. I hope not everyone is asleep now.
No.
Like you showed in your last picture. On the contrary, I think we are all very much alert. And I think you have touched on a lot of things that we have discussed. And I think this is really a very important perspective. And I think it was also important that you gave us some kind of outside perspective again from the rheumatology area, where this is also very relevant, and where in the last years there was a lot of development regarding not only methodology but also on the content, so what actually we should measure. So thank you very much, Martin. And I think you also showed a lot of the research activities you have been involved and where you have published as a first author. So this is really something where patients are in the leading role, actually, not only maybe collaborators, but actually in the leading role in terms of the research projects. And I think this is really important. Martin, we have a few questions for you. I have seen in the chat. Before we start with the questions, do you want to add something, Meni?
I just wanted to thank Martin. I think it's wonderful to have a patient confirming some assumptions that some of us have made. So it was wonderful to actually
hear him saying about the importance of integrating patients, of having them from the beginning on the journey, which is exactly what we plan to do. So I think it would be wonderful if he remains somehow an advisor to us to make sure we always keep on the right track and do the right thing. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do so. Yeah.
So that's great, Martin. We are not going to lose you, hopefully. So we will make sure that you stay involved. So here is one question. What is your opinion about using digital devices to measure PROS?
I think that's really something of the future. And actually, developing shared decision-making tools based on real-world evidence, that will probably done in a digital way. In the future, more and more people will have access to internet and also internet-based healthcare interventions. But it also had advances in conducting and using PROs, specifically in item response theory. If you use that in a very productive and effective manner, I think patients will benefit from this. It may reduce questionnaire burden or questionnaire fatigue and make it more efficient. So I think, but it should always be developed with patient input.
Thank you, Martin. I think you already answered two more questions about computer adaptive testing. And I think you were very much talking what is to the core of our heart as outcomes researchers. And we are focusing a lot on computer adaptive testing and item response theory and common metrics. So this is really an important issue also, which we have put into the application of the H2O project. Yeah. So I think you're actually the ideal advisor for the project. We will we will not let you leave our advisory board. There's another question. How can patients be sustained to be able to collaborate in the activities related to PROS? What kind of training should be offered?
Yeah, training can be provided in different ways, but I think the best way is what I would just call training on the job. It really means taking by the hand, and before the start of a project, bring them up to speed. Something what we did, for instance, with developing this psoriatic arthritis impact of disease score, was that at every task force meeting, we had a 2 hours patient meeting in advance of that meeting, just to go over the agenda, to address some questions from patients, and make them also a little bit more relaxed and comfortable in the meeting. So I think that's one manner. And another one is always to have more than one. It's probably also more than 2 patients in the group as what we call patient research partners. So if they are with 3, they feel probably more confident and empowered, and enjoy also more their participation in a project like this.
Yes, thank you. And I'm reading the next one, which says, brilliant presentation, very motivating for the project, a true resource. So you probably don't need to answer that, but we can only echo that, Martin. It was a wonderful talk and it was really great.
There was one question that raised the issue. Wasn't it a pity that we lost the final 4 items? When I gave the example of the psoriatic arthritis score, and I think that's in fact, it is true, but also from patients as well as from physicians, when they enter a collaborative initiative like developing a PRO, you start with an open mind, and you should start with an open mind and be realistic, and you have to make compromises. So if you develop an instrument that also should be used in clinical trials, then you have to carefully consider the number of items. So yes, having 12 was a compromise. And I think it is still the items that we lost. We should still educate physicians and also patients that they can be discussed with physicians if they are relevant to an individual patient. But it's the consequences and implication of collaboration. You cannot have it all, and you have to accept that you sometimes have to make compromises.
Yes, thank you, Martin. There's another question on that authorities might be reluctant in many countries to believe and take decisions based on PROs. Could this be based on the lack of reliable databases? And the question is whether the H2O project could be a way of changing this, maybe.
Yeah, I think the latter that is absolutely true. I hope that this project could demonstrate that if you develop core sets with a high face validity from all stakeholders involved, and if PROs are becoming part of that core outcome sets, that they can become more influencing. And I think also regulators and HTA bodies are becoming more sensitive to PROs. But I agree that their methodology should be sound, unarbitrary, probably also clearly defined. So there is still work to do. It's not easy to demonstrate that PROs are better reflecting disease activity than some of the current endpoints in studies. But I think they might sometimes.
Yes, and I fully agree. And I think you have said very important things, Martin. First of all, that this could be an addition to what is measured. So like this dual treat to target strategy, where you would have one more biological, biomedical outcome and a more patient-oriented one. And you have also touched on this value for patients. So I think this probably adds some information to measuring, for example, disease activity, and you could have disease impact, which is probably a different concept, but which you can only measure maybe from the perspective of patients. Yeah? So I think this is really important, very important. There's another question on how much information we should give patients, probably about how the data will be used, where the data will be saved, who will see the data, and when the data will be disclosed, if disclosed, and data protection.
I think you need to be very transparent in this. So I think all information, there are no limitations of the information that are open to physicians or other stakeholders. They should all be also open to patients. It doesn't mean that they always have to communicate it actively with all the participants in a study, but they should be available. And I think one of the roles of the patient research partners in the project would be to assess what information is important to share with patients anyway. And if we do, are we able to make a kind of public summaries, lay summaries of the information that you would like to share with patients? So making information understandable could also be one of the tasks of the patients in the project.
Yes, and it's probably not only that we give information, but that we do it in a way that it's really understandable by patients. And I also like the way that you said you had pre-meetings before with the patients, before the task force meeting, for example, to really discuss these issues, and that this might be a training on the job, in fact. Yeah. So
yes, that's right. That if you want to make the collaboration genuine and not a tokenistic something, you need to bring them up to speed. So you have to provide some training. And this is, of course, only for the patient representatives that have that you are going to involve in the project on a longer term, and maybe even for 3 years. Yeah. That's correct.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think we have learned a lot, and also from a research perspective, I think you have given a lot of insights and a lot of things what are just happening now. So very timely data. And I would really like to thank you for being with us. We will make sure that we will not lose you during the whole project. And we also take your promise that you will come to Vienna for the meeting in the end, or maybe in between, to share some of the or to see some of our results. Yeah. So thank you very much again, Martin, for being with us and for being a friend for all those years. And we very much enjoyed your talk. Do you want to say some final words, Mini?
No, sorry.
No, thank you, Martin. It's been wonderful meeting you over the screen, and looking forward to actually meeting you in Vienna or somewhere else in the years to come. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So then I would like to announce the next session, which is actually the social event, where we hope that you all will join. But now I think we need either Martina from Team IT or someone from the technology support in Barcelona to introduce how this will work and what we have to do now.
Yeah, we need to access to another link. You will find it on your email.
Okay, so we will access to another link, and then we are told what should be done.
Yeah.
Martina, could you send that also to Martin if he wants to participate?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thank you all for attending this public webinar. I think we have learned a lot, and we will take all what you have advised us, Martin, seriously, and will include that in our planning in the H2O project. And yes, we hope to see you all on the way our project will go, and we hope that you will all stay connected and that people will become collaborators within H2O, which will be really important for the success of our project. So thank you very much.